Welcome to the Pitch It To Me podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of flesh and blood design. Today, we're going to be exploring the prettiest and edgiest talents, shadow and light respectively. On Red Pitch, Fuzzy will unravel demonic knowledge for you to consume. On Yellow Pitch, Joel will illuminate the way of virtue. And on Blue Pitch, Clark will, quote, go on some random diatribe about light and shadow and talent design or whatever, close quote. You can find us across all socials, such as TikTok and Instagram at Pitch It To Me Podcast.
Why'd you guys put those quotes there?
I don't know. You wrote it.
Well, because you said it.
All right. In today's episode, we're going to tell you all about the two wolves that live inside of you and which one of those wolves you should feed.
Shadow or light. Devil or the angel.
Maybe you got your first taste of one of these heroes when you were getting reps on the most dominant hero in the game. Maybe you started by trying to champion one of the worst heroes in the game. Either way, you should be excited because LSS has decided to revisit these heroes in Dusk Till Dawn. So we wanted to discuss these talents a little bit detached from the heroes themselves. What does it mean to be light? What does it mean to be shadow?
We also want to take this time to remind you guys, if you are an audio-only listener, we do have a YouTube where you can see the cards that we are talking about. We also have the custom card Google Drive, so if we talk about any custom cards in this episode, previous episodes, future episodes, we have a link that just gives you access to the folder. You can see all the card designs in there. And also, by the time this episode comes out, we should have uploaded our first couple of TikToks. Woo-hoo! So we're becoming real content creators.
Oh yeah, we're creating content, all right. Okay, so for Red Pitch today, I want to talk about the cool talent, Shadow. Let's talk about, what does it mean to be a Shadow hero? If we look specifically at the, generic Shadow cards that aren't tied to a certain class, we see a couple patterns so far. For instance, there are some that are able to play themselves from Banish. There are some that allow you to play other cards from Banish. Like the cards that if you want to banish your Command and Conquer and then play it out of Banish Zone, there's a card for that, and it's a Shadow card. There's also the pattern of specifically having effects that are stronger against other light heroes, because the Demonastery is all about fighting against Solana and the Power of Soul. They just hate that Soul guy so much. And when I say hate, I mean the TCG term to specifically have mechanics that counter another card's mechanics.
Yeah, because in the lore, Shadow heroes don't really talk about hating Soul very much. They talk more about Soul hating on them.
Oh yeah, that's a key quality of any master plan. You're the victim.
We're just continuing it.
Yeah, the Demonastery is look, we were just trying to figure things out. It you guys decided to exile us and make us the bad guys.
We can also look at how each hero wears their Shadow talent in different ways. For example, they're all doing it a little bit differently, right? There's a common thread of Blood Debt. Blood Debt means that if this card is banished, it's going to hurt you at the end of the turn if it's still there. Chain likes to create soul shackles that banish cards from the top of your deck each turn. And it's this slow build of okay, more and more cards are being banished. I have to play these cards or else they hurt me. But potentially all of them can be played if you have enough action points or if you banish the right things or if you get the right combos off. There's a little bit of making sure that you jump through a couple hoops to make it work, but the payoff is you get to play lots of cards. In Flesh and Blood, you only have a 4-card hand by default, but there are ways that you can tear that open. You can arsenal a card, or you can be chained and banish half of your deck, and then be able to play all of those cards in the same turn and overwhelm your opponent.
Yeah, why have 4 cards when you can have 9? Is the basic principle there.
I sell my soul to a demon. He collects his blood debt. I get to win lots of tournaments and hit Living Legend at a pretty quick pace.
Seems like a good deal to me. I don't know.
Is that what Blood Debt does? I always just died to Blood Debt.
Yeah, we died before we can figure that out.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Levia has a very different relationship with Shadow and being a Shadow champion and Blood Debt. For Levia, Blood Debt is strictly a penalty, but she has ways to work around it. Blood Debt? Oh, just kidding. I don't actually take damage this turn because I'm giving you more Blood Debt cards, right? pile of 5 cards that give me blood debt. Let's make it 6, but I won't take damage this turn. Let's make it 7 and I won't take damage this turn. And it gets to this bigger and bigger pile that's threatening to do more and more damage to you. But as long as you can feed the beast and keep your banish pile growing with those big attacks, you don't have to take any blood debt damage. It's a very different style, right, guys?
It's a really cool design. Like I love the sort of Damocles idea of like you get these extra powerful things, but it's sort of always building up this like, hey, if you ever stumble, if you ever screw up, if you ever misplay, it's gonna punish you. Of course, that isn't exactly how the card printings have played out, but it is definitely a wonderful idea.
Levia has some really interesting cards she can play out of Banish too. Some she shares with, what's his name? Shane, like Ghostly Visit and Mutated Mass. They don't fit as nicely in her kit as they should, because really your turn starts with, how can I banish a 6 power card from my graveyard or whatever, and then I can do whatever I want. So it's like the question of action points, like how many cards do I have to work with, and then I can do all the cool stuff that Shadow does. But for the most part, it just seems like, that it's just another resource that you have to keep track of, which is very fun to play with, but again, very, very punishing.
But it's a cool idea, right? Like this looming doom that's going to threaten to kill you, you know?
Yeah.
I want to come back to Levia, but first I want to give a little bit more context for what other heroes have been doing with like blood debt. And namely, Vincent is someone we just got introduced to with this newest set. And Vincent uses blood debt similarly to Chain. After all, they're both Shadow Runeblade. But for Vincent, it's more about having cards that have a little bit of a restriction and you needing to keep up momentum in order to be able to play the things from blood debt at all. Like you have these Rune Gate cards where you need to create Rune Chants in order to be able to release them from their blood debt cage, so to speak. Or at least that's my take. It's very new, so you guys might have like a little bit of a different take on what that like metaphorical blood debt means to Vincent.
I think for Vincent, it really is in her design of sacrificing a card from hand. She has to. It is non-negotiable to banish a card from your hand. And so you want that to be a blood debt card that you can play from Banish Zone. And that's what it's going to be most of the time. But it still feels like a sacrifice. Like if you are put in a position by another player where you have to block a lot, then you're really hoping that one last card is Funeral Moon, right? Where you can banish it and then play it to create a rune chant. I think that's what Funeral Moon does.
Yeah, it's a non-attack action that makes a rune chant.
That's sort of like what you want your one card hand to be. But what if it isn't? You can be screwed. Or what if you banish the card that you wanted to pitch?
Yeah, if you just draw a handful of no blood debt cards, then you might be giving some offering to the Demonastery that doesn't help your game plan at all.
Yeah, I've kind of been focusing on the Rune Gate keyword itself in the sense of like portals don't like half work. You need the whole thing. You know what I mean? So it's like it's all about getting enough pieces to assemble this Rune Gate and then unleashing these powerful demons to like aid you. Like I don't know anything about like the lore behind Vincent because I don't care, but that's what I imagined it would be, right? Is like assembling the pieces for this portal and reaping the benefits from conniving with demons.
And it's nice because it's not quite what Viserai does, where his rune chants just reduce the costs, right?
Yeah.
So you could have under the amount of rune chants for Viserai to cast his things. But with Vincent, you have to have the exact or greater than. And for those higher costed cards, it is a real requirement. It really requires setup.
So the through line here for Shadow, at least my take, is that there's this big power that allows you to set the pace of the game mechanically, but there are certain hoops or threats that are looming over you that you have to jump through or work through to make them work. You're not just playing against your opponent, you're also playing against your own deck. And the reward for that is potentially greater value numbers-wise, extra cards, extra damage, free things. Would you guys agree with that take?
Yeah.
Is that what it feels like to play a Shadow hero?
Definitely, especially with Levia, because you have this additional lose clause if you don't manage your resources appropriately. But Shadow is definitely a talent about getting additional card advantage through either dealing points to yourself or reducing how much threat density you have in your deck. It's just getting more card advantage without explicitly saying you draw more cards. Like there's more hoops. At least that's what they were trying to do with Chain. That's why he outlelled, because there's just no downside to playing like all blood debt. You just play stuff for free.
Especially when you are able to construct your deck in a way. Like I think limited Chain is, you can see what Chain was trying to be in limited, where it was like, oh, there's like 2 cost cards, or you have to do this thing to give it go again. And it makes it hard to play your 3-4 blood debt cards out of your banish zone. But the moment that you go into constructed and you can pick exactly how many blood debt cards you have and which blood debt cards there are, you no longer need to deal with those more awkward banishes. You just get to throw everything. No, there still is always the issue of like, oh, I want to sideboard in Command and Conquers. Oh, I just banished all my Command and Conquers. I can't play Command and Conquer anymore, and I wanted it for this matchup. So there's a little bit of like Chain not being able to have that nice adjustment. With Levia and Vincent, we haven't had a ton of time to play with Vincent yet, but I definitely feel as if the whole idea of Shadow expanding out from Chain, it's removing the flexibility of your cards for like a half card of card advantage is almost the way I would put it. Because it's not quite a full card of card advantage for Vincent and for Levia. A lot of the times they have to sit in your banished zone, and there's like a risk or a punishment for that. With Blood Debt, usually it's fairly small, fairly incremental. You know, late game Levia is another thing entirely. We also need to remember that like you can only play those cards. You cannot pitch them. And so you still really need to tailor what you are doing on your blocking turn so that you know what you can do on your attacking turn.
Very much, yeah.
It makes it a little bit more complicated than I would say most other heroes. Most other heroes, you can just kind of throw your whole hand at something and not feel too bad about it. I would say for Shadow heroes specifically, that is not an option that you have.
Yeah, and in some cases, like with Levia, sometimes you just have to leak a ton of damage because
you need the thing that turns off Blood Debt.
Exactly, yeah, because like you could potentially take, you know, like six or more damage on the end of your turn if you like don't play something exactly right, or if you don't hedge against. Okay, if I, you know, play a go again card like Wild Red, for instance, and I need that to go to like threaten enough damage because like the turn that just, or the play that just turns off Blood Debt is not strong enough to close out the game or give myself enough wiggle room to, you know, actually come back in this game.
Yeah, but of course you can end up in these broken circumstances. Chain is banishing everything off the top. With Vincent, maybe it's like throwing 2 big statted Runegate cards back to back, maybe even 3, right? Playing a bunch of stuff out of the banish zone because you let it sit in there for a while. I would say for Levia, it's her loop. When you can get your loop going, just play cards out of banish to put into graveyard, and then banish it and put it right back into the banish zone, then just back and forth.
Yeah.
And because you're always turning off Blood Debt, it's not even a negative. And you end up in that hyper power state. So Shadow, I think giving that hyper power state is a big identity of Shadow.
Yeah.
And I think it's why so many people are attracted to the Shadow.
The ceilings look so high, you know, but there's a very low floor.
Very low. And you just straight up lose the game sometimes. It's not even like, oh, I have to take an off turn. It's like, oh, I get to go next. Get some lunch.
Chain banishing important sideboard cards. Levia just taking 10 damage to Blood Debt. Vincent, I don't think we've... maybe Vincent's design allows for a little bit more flexibility in defense.
Sure. Yeah, the floor for Vincent seems kind of high. Like, it's not as bad as Levia killing herself, or... I don't know. Chain's floor didn't really get too low either. I feel like it was pretty consistent.
Through deck construction, yeah. I think they were able to keep it fairly consistent. But it was still, the risk was still always there. You could always RNG your way into killing your sideboard tech.
Yeah, or even banishing like your Art of War or something on a really pivotal turn that you need, or your turn just isn't as explosive because you banished a powerful card,
or maybe you're getting fatigued out and you're just helping their game plan. Yeah, so like it was present. Yeah, big trade-offs, big distance. That's some good insight. I don't think I've really thought about that with Shadow Heroes.
Really high ceilings, really low floors, big risks, big rewards. That's Shadow. It plays through the banish zone. No other like class or talent really uses the banish zone to that level, right? it's like feeding into the idea of an alternate dimension where things can enter through and there's a world beyond our own, and Shadow's the most willing to accept and work with it.
Yeah, especially because it goes against so much of Flesh and Blood's fundamentals. Like, every card matters, and if you just get to constantly recur the same cards or just never run out of gas while your opponent still has to play by the rules, essentially, like, it feels bad. So I can see why they are trying to now design more ways to make it harder to play out of Banish, and like more, I guess, downsides. Well, Blood Debt itself is a good downside, but yeah, just making it harder to play out of Banish so you're not basically playing with 120 cards.
So I also want to talk a little bit before we move on to any other talent about what we might be able to see in Shadow in the future. I think all of the talents at this point in time are a little bit half-baked, and that's okay because they're not meant to be full heroes, right? They're not meant to be a complete context, but I'd be curious how they develop and increase that design space in the future. I have a couple guesses, and then maybe we can move on to some more of my I wishes. It looks like you can already sort of see them dipping into loss of life being a Shadow thing, getting a reward for life being lost, or letting you pay life in order to do an effect. We're seeing that with the Vincent design especially now, but Blood Debt itself is something that is already dipping into that design space a little bit about you can keep this around in your banish zone, but I'm going to cost you something. Give me a little bit of that blood.
I still really want to see a Levia card where it's like cost reduced by how much blood debt you took.
Oh, Lord.
Or where its power is for how much blood debt you took.
Yeah.
Like it's a design space I'd like to see. Maybe they're testing it and it's testing way too OP.
It's rules clunky, very doable, and I want to see it happen.
What I've noticed is like you can, like with the Levia's design space, they always add you can only play this if you banish a 6, or it only gets X effect if you banish a 6. I'm like, dude, like we have like
you can't play this if you don't take 3 damage from blood debt.
Yeah.
0-6, go again. There we go.
Like on your last turn?
Yeah, on your last turn, if you took 3 or more damage from blood debt, and you get a 0 for 6 with go again. But you can only play it if you
seems insane.
If you only
I'm here for it though.
Yeah, but like what happens in the late game, right? You have like 10 blood debt. You have to take 10 blood debt to play this card.
Yeah, because you can't just take part of it. You just take all of
it. You take all the blood debt. You don't get to stop. I mean, Levia consumed, but that's for a future episode.
I'd also like to see cards that dip more into the banish zone in the way that like you can play them that turn, kind of like red impulse draw, right? Like in Magic the Gathering, you had impulse draw in red where you don't draw a card, you just banish a card from the top of your deck and you can play it this turn as if you drew it, but just for that turn. I think it'd be cool if we saw some more stuff like that with Shadow. Like that could be another tome, right? Tome of Dark Knowledge. You banish the top 2 cards of your deck and you may play them this turn.
Yeah, there's Slithering Shadowpede, which says if you banish it from hand, it's playable from the banish zone. It's a 1 for 6, which is very well statted. It also has no block value.
And that would probably feel really close to Chain too, who's already banishing cards at the start of turn to hopefully play them.
Yeah.
And cards are already in your hand for only a single turn anyway in the game, so that wouldn't be a really big penalty.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to give Shadow more options of like being aggressive or getting card advantage with, again, just not saying straight up draw a card, because we've seen in Magic especially how overpowered that can be, and giving Levia more cards for free can get her into that space where she's like, okay, I have wildly outstatted cards. I have 2 to 3 actions with Scabskin Leathers, and all of my stuff I can play at a banish. Like, why wouldn't I play this hero outside of not having on hits?
Plus, I like the idea of it being a downside too. Like in Chains of Mephitis from Dusk Till Dawn, it like if your opponent draws a card during their action phase, they don't draw it. Instead, it banishes and they can play it that turn, which is a lot like drawing, except you can't pitch or block with it or arsenal it. So like them ending their turn with a snatch is no longer like a great play because they can't do anything with that card they get off of it, right? And that seems like a really cool downside that's very Shadow, and I would totally be excited to see more design space played around with that effect.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can have this power, but there's a cost that comes with it. You have to use it now. You know?
I'd also like to see some Okay, so the Demonastery, right? They hate them light heroes, you know? And when I say hate
Can't
the
stand
light
them.
people, I mean the TCG equivalent where you are specifically presenting mechanics that counterplay yours. But what if like they also hated the rest of the world too? Like once like Solana gets off their back and they brought the church to ruin, maybe they'll come for Arya next and they'll specifically hate the Earth heroes or the Ice heroes or the Lightning heroes. Like maybe some developments in the story could see them being like, you know what? Screw you, Earth hero, Light hero, or Lightning hero, Ice hero, Draconic hero. Who knows? I think that might be fun to see in the future.
Just make them the haters.
Shadow being the haters.
I'd be okay with that. Mostly because I hate all of Tales of Arya, but
So you're already getting into the Shadow spirit.
I'm into it. I'm a hater for real.
And then we also get to see some really like cool demons. Like
Yeah.
there's a specialization for each of the shadow heroes right now that lets them summon like a huge demon 6/6 ally. I think that's really cool. I would be excited for like a shadow, maybe shadow illusionist hero in the future that like had a bunch of little allies. Kind of like Dromite with her dragons, but more like demons instead of dragons.
Oh yeah, just little guys, little imps. Just
Little
scrambling.
impies.
Yeah, just scrambling over everyone and gnawing on them.
They can be really fun. Or like big ass monster demons.
Both is good.
So that's what I'd be excited to see in the future. I like shadow heroes. I think they have some really cool designs. They are always intriguing to me. That's my shadow section. I like to hand things off to some other talent that I hate.
Brr.
Joel, what do you got for
I
Yellow
mean,
Pitch?
To be fair, I hate half of the light heroes, so I don't blame you there. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the light heroes. Light in general really cares about a new mechanic called the Soul, which is just a storage mechanic where you can use later on for incremental value, either through like go again or extra block value, things like that. Bolton, yay, I have in my notes to say yay. Your entire kit is based around charging your soul, and you can use your soul later on for your power turns, like if you want to go really wide, or forcing awkward blocks with his hero ability, which says if you block with an attack action on any of his attacks, that attack gets +1. So it makes breakpoints of 3 turn into 4, presenting some interesting, combat tricks, stuff like that. And most recently, he has gotten more tools to go wider in the combat chain and self-buffing instead of relying on your opponent to make like inefficient blocks. Like if you're looking at a Bolt of Courage red for 3 and it doesn't have like a buff effect on it or anything, you're like, okay, if I just don't block, they have to use those Snapdragon Scalers or some other card to give a go again, and then they continue their turn. Whereas every other hero can just do that without having to, be a 3 intellect the entire game. So
Yeah, 0-3 with no go again it would be 2 cards, right? Because you have to charge.
yeah.
To even like give it the chance of gaining go again. So
Wow, light heroes suck.
two cards for 0-3, no go again unless you block.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very good. But then the moment that you add the ability to pump it.
Well, I imagine those little courage tokens that they just printed will probably help a whole lot with that, huh?
Oh, a lot. Yeah. And that's what I mean by the self-buffing, like through the new arms piece and the other ways you can generate courage tokens either on your opponent's turn even or on your turn on every on hit or even just by charging. So it's like a really hard thing to interact with. So that has been really pushing how far a Bolton deck can go and like what damage numbers they can represent. And then the other light hero, Prism, she uses soul in a much different way. She focuses on utilizing like the heralds for being aggressive because those are really aggressively statted. They say like 1 for 6, 1 for 7, and their on hits are like all of them say go to your soul, and then some of them give you spectral shields, some of them let you draw, some of them let you recur other heralds. So the downside being Phantasm with the illusionist, like if you block with a 6 power, then you can theoretically stop their assaults because it's an illusion. And then they also have like auras paired with spectral shields for oppressive board presence and like damage prevention. So like the spectral shield all say, or it has ward 1. So if you just take damage, you prevent 1 of that damage. If you have multiple, you can have like an entire attack blocked and you don't have to spend any cards from hand. They can also be used to attack. And the auras, they have some really crazy effects. Like, well, all of them have spectra. So if you attack it as your target, then you lose your go again. You destroy the aura, yay, but you end up losing your turn as a consequence. And then most recently, they've been given access to Angels, which all have Ward 4, so it helps you defend your life total of, I think it's 32 now, which is, I think, the lowest NECC hero has seen so far.
Other than Kano.
Other than Kano. Who cares about him? And they all have
Fuzzy cares.
Sorry, Fuzzy. And they also have really powerful effects when they enter as figments and then when they attack on subsequent turns. So this new Prism still uses the auras and the heralds from the previous iteration, but now has a new way to be annoying with these things that you just have to answer. Otherwise, it just gets a lot of value just staying on the board and being able to pitch to attack.
So light heroes, you could say, kind of have this through line of having the soul as that like resource to draw upon, but it means something different for each one, right?
Exactly. Each hero, Bolton specifically, wants to spend it by giving his below rate cards go again, and Prism wants to use her soul to get incremental value with spectral shields or creating more angels.
So like for Bolton, a card in soul can represent an action point, and for Prism, a card in soul can represent like 1 life, 1 damage prevention.
Yeah, which seems below rate, but over the course of the game, like, because you don't have to bank it all at once. Like, for instance, Bolton's most popular deck for a while being combo, you just let like 4 or 5 souls sit in there, and then you attack 6 to 8 times in one turn, and you refill your soul, and then you can cash that in for another time. It's kind of similar to Shadow in the sense that you have an extension of your hand and more resources to work with.
But like no penalty, you can just bank it, sit on it,
Yeah.
come back to it later, forget about it.
But typically the paying it off is a lot lower, right? In terms of old Prism, it was 2 mana, remove 1 of those soul cards, and you get a spectral shield, a thing that gives you ward 1. That really isn't a lot of power for 2 mana when you think about it like that. But then when you realize that that's happening maybe even on the opponent's turn as well as on their turn, when you're getting like free charges off of like Soul Shield or off of the Herald hitting, it really starts to ramp up. So rather than a card and a half, it's more like a card and a quarter.
Yeah, and if you pair that with Luminaris too, like all of those can attack for 0 as long as you have a yellow pitch. And so that's why it was so oppressive, because not only did you, if you weren't a hero that had a plethora of 6 powers, like you were just like often sending or blocking 2 cards to block this overstated Herald, and then there's another one that comes in for 6 or 7. It's like, how do you block with that and then still get rid of the aura that they're playing on your turn? It's just, so there's a lot of ways to take advantage of the soul in Prism more so than Bolton. Bolton, like, getting action points is great, but again, historically, you have to rely on your opponents like making like objectively bad blocks to get anywhere. That's why he thrives really in the late game when these on hits are way more relevant, or with these courage tokens, the on-demand go again is a lot easier to take advantage of. So Prism obviously has seen way more success than Bolton. So some stuff that I wanted to see as potential design space in the future. The first being graveyard hate targeted at opponents. For instance, if Levia or Vincent really care about banishing from the graveyard or banishing from their hand, I mean, they already have the turning banished cards face down, but what if you just like start doing that from the graveyard? And so like these other recursion decks like Earth or whatever start taking hits because light is, you know, like this force of justice, I don't know, and just depleting resources that way.
That'd be so cool. Like in the future, if there's like a necromancer that like comes from the graveyard and the light heroes are like, no, shutting that down. No necromancy here. Banish your graveyard.
Yeah, any like evil archetype can be targeted by light in that way, as long as they, you know, interact with the graveyard. And some other decks, like for instance, Katsu has a lot more recursion pieces now than he did before. So this would be a way for light to interact with heroes outside of just, you know, shadow heroes. And then the last and probably the most broken, which I really hope they do for Bolton at least, is being able to play cards out of your soul. We're already seeing, you know, getting benefits from charging things to your soul, like with the new bannerets giving you like courage tokens, quicken tokens, extra life, things like that. So
Prism letting her get the figments.
Yeah, exactly. Like anytime something goes to soul, you get a free card. So if there is something for Bolton because like Prism doesn't need any help. Let's be real. If there's something to give Bolton a way to play these cards like Via the Vanguard or Bolt of Courage or Take Flight.
Some turns you have to charge them, right? To make your optimal play. And so but then you're taking your power cards out of your deck permanently.
Exactly.
And so being able to still get those back somehow is important for Bolton, definitely.
Right. And we're still talking about really underrated cards until we buff it somehow. So, I mean, if we're just playing like one card out of every few turns, like if you have to build a certain amount of soul, you banish X amount of cards to play one. I mean, even that is still a lot of value for Bolton for having such a huge penalty to like get these cards into soul in the first place.
And you know what, Joel? I think we'll see this someday. Like the ability to play cards out of your soul.
Oh, definitely.
And like, here's why, okay? So they could have had soul be a die, right? Like just like a counter on your hero. Like in order to charge, banish this and put a counter on your soul counter or whatever, right? But instead they chose to use the cards as the marker for that, even though there's not really a big reason to right now. And that's why people nowadays even like just have a die, right? Like a pile of cards with a die on top.
Yeah.
And like the die is how you keep track of soul. These cards are just like not quite banished for some reason, even though it doesn't really matter if they're banished or not, right?
True.
That's why I think in the future, they're going to play with it. I think they're future-proofing their design to have a lot more like it matters what is in soul. And that could even be something different, right? Maybe you have a hero in the future that is like, if you have 3 copies of this card in your soul, then it gets a big bonus or something, right? Like if you're able to charge 3 of this or...
And also matters that you're able to leave it in soul while also still spending resources out of your soul.
Interesting. I like both of those ideas. It makes me really hyped to see like what other light heroes they come out with and how they interact with, this soul mechanic. Because you're right, they could just, banish it face down or use a die or whatever. But the fact that they're using the face up cards makes me hopeful that we can, play Via the Vanguard out of banish for for these. Because like if Ranger gets 6 copies of whatever card or Azuri gets 6 copies of whatever card, so can Bolton. It's not that hard, right? We get push cards.
I mean, I definitely already see a design for a card. It would be a 4-cost aura, which we've already seen in the old Prism card pool. And technically now the new Prism card pool, but it's definitely less pushed for what that hero is trying to do.
Yeah.
Just a 4-cost aura that says you can now play cards out of your soul for 1 extra resource.
Oh.
Pay a resource, 1 card in soul is now playable.
Yeah.
I think there is space with Gain Life.
Okay.
They just printed a card that is 1 mana gain 3, but if you charged, if a card entered your soul this turn, then it gets to be played as an instant. Light is very much, the good. Good versus evil is definitely the light versus shadow thing. Yeah, they try to throw in a little bit of that whole, is soul a big corrupt religion that's trying to hide the truth, and is the demonastery actually this truth-seeking organization? So there's a little bit of that tied in there to not make it so overtly good versus evil. But life gain is still very much associated with the light. And we've just talked about how life loss is very important for shadow.
Yeah.
So maybe light ends up with a lot more gain life support in the future. Maybe we could see that when light dips into other classes.
Well, I definitely like the banneret that lets you gain a life whenever you hit next. So I'm wondering if there's an aura that... And what I also really like about, and I'll speak more on it later, is auras that get like put to the battlefield if you charge them. And like, so if there's more auras that you have to interact with as my opponent as Bolton, but I can use them to gain life or get action points or gain extra power. That's an interesting design space because Bolton is not convening with demons, but he is praying to angels. So if he gets like different blessings, that could be an interesting design space by getting, banishing cards from soul to get extra resources through the auras that you put on the battlefield.
I feel like that's an interesting question, Clark, that you brought up about what class would pair with light really well in the future. And I think light is very broad. Like basically like who can stock up a resource to be able to spend over time at the potential cost of card advantage in the short term, except not even because like Prism's cards are just on-hit effects, right?
I think Light Wizard could be fascinating.
That would be
We've
cool.
already seen some instant speed be important in Light.
Yeah.
Both of Prism's abilities are light base.
I like that idea.
Instant speed.
If for no other reason other than like Icelander is blue focused, so we could have like a yellow focused wizard, you know?
That would,
Yeah.
Wizard is so blue defined, and seeing like a yellow defined wizard would be really interesting.
And
Or even like Ninja, because so far with Ninja we've seen blue and red focus, so that yellow one would, and there's some yellow zero costs that would work really well, or that are already exist in Bolton, so that same design space would work well with like Kadachi's and then a zero cost with Go Again and things
somehow
of
we didn't talk about that at all, and that's that like light heroes just love the color yellow.
Yeah.
Like work it in as much as they can. Like they reward you for playing yellow cards. They reward you for charging yellow cards. They reward you for pitching yellow cards.
Everything costs 2 or 1 or 0, right?
Yeah.
Very few things cost 3.
Or 4.
Yeah, or they cost 4 because they want you to pitch 2
They're
yellows.
pretending that you're going to pitch 2 yellows to play their 4 cost cards.
Yeah.
But we all know that's a blue and a Findles tunic counter.
Yeah. Prism was definitely meant to be the yellow hero, and then I drafted a lot of yellow cards in a Monarch draft, and then it was like, where are all your blues? You need blues to attack with your Spectral Shields, and I'm like, I didn't consider. I thought lights are all about yellows. What is this?
And like I respect it, you know? Like yellow is the bad color. That's why
Yeah.
no other deck like they just try to avoid them.
Yeah.
Because if you want something that's good when you play it, just do red. If you want something that's good when you pitch it, do blue. If you want good blocking cards, well, lots of things block for 3 and yellow doesn't interact with that at all, right? Like you might as well run a red or a blue. So the fact that they've had a specific space in the game where they're rewarding yellows, it kind of feels like it rounds out the game, right? Like, okay, you do have a reason to play yellow if you play these heroes, just to give you a little bit of an extra, like, don't feel bad for playing them.
Well, not even that. I really like how all their specializations are yellow. It really emphasizes that element. I really like how it interacts with pitch values and cost values in an interesting way, and it makes you rethink what do things need to cost in my deck, and where should my costs be in my deck. Yeah, I think it is nice. It is saying, hey, we don't just print these yellows for limited. We do print them for constructed.
And I noticed too, like, because you just mentioned how you draft yellows for Prism, but you really need blues. And I think back to Bolton and Prism starting weapons, like the Hatchets of Body and Mind and the Iris. They both require blues. So, like, in the future, I imagine there being more design space around they're not signature weapons, but starter weapons. Like, I want to play with, Hatchet Bolton, but if I'm pitching like 2 yellows for 1 attack for each hatchet and then a card to give Go Again or something like that. Like that seems really costly. So like what if I get more benefits from using my blues? Or with Prism, I have these larger attacks with blue or whatever the case may be. I just noticed that they kind of step away from the inherent blue design in their starting weapons and into their constructed forms.
Yeah.
If they do another class with light, I think it would be one that can dip into that like yellow space pretty comfortably. So it's probably not going to be a light guardian. Can you imagine like a guardian that wants to run a lot of yellows, but maybe ranger? Like the ranger seems to comfortably have like these yellow line decks. You pitch 1 resource to load your arrow of light, and you spend your last resource to shoot it,
We did just get a new ranger, but maybe that means it'll be a while until we see a ranger.
Probably, right?
Yeah, like it's going to be a while until we see Light and Shadow revisited. So
Yeah, rip.
who knows? maybe they'll come around at the same time. Maybe that Light Ranger is a real shot in the light.
All right, Clark, you get tiny claps. All right, enough about them light heroes. Clark, what do you got for us for blue pitch?
So for blue pitch, we wanted to take some time sort of talking about light and shadow together. In both red pitch and yellow pitch, we talked about how shadow and light are all about, they have this like design element of them hating on each other in terms of the card game.
Right. By hate, you mean specifically print cards that mechanically counter the other.
Yes, and like only the other. And very, very specifically. I decided to call this dichotomous design. It is these two forces that are directly contradicting each other. They are dichotomous. So the main way that we've seen this is in the new Dusk to Dawn set. There is banishing cards from Soul when you attack a light hero, or if they are a light hero, if they have cards in Soul, you get to banish it out of Soul, and then they don't get to use that resource. Whereas for Light against Shadow, they get to turn cards in the banish zone upside down. Now, in both instances, there's like kind of little ways of playing around it. Shadow doesn't always mind you turning things upside down. Wait, you mean you're taking away the blood debt text, which means I don't take damage from blood debt? Why, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's not a strict downside. It can be nice.
Or a light hero, especially Prism, where she can do things at instant speed. Oh, you want to get rid of my last card in Soul? Well, let me just specifically do this thing to take it out there and get my resource now, and then you don't get that ability. So there are some ways of playing around it, which is good. I think it would be bad if there was no way of playing around it, or if there was no minor upside. But I think that is an important element of how the hate's been printed. There's also text that matters if it's against a light or shadow hero, respectively. The biggest one, and I only know this because I'm such a Leviathan diehard. So we got Hungering Demigon, which can be played from the banish zone, but only if it's against a light hero. Yeah, if an opposing hero has one or more cards in their Soul, you may play this from your banish zone, and then when it hits a hero, banish a card from their Soul.
Oh.
Super good against light heroes.
Yeah.
We also got Soul Cleaver, which has Go Again if they have a card in Soul.
Yeah. So these are all things that like, oh wait,
Or Soul Butcher.
if we're against a light hero, we get these really nice effects. And I'm pretty sure Light has the same thing. I'm not super up to date on Dusk Till Dawn. and the
Actually,
card
I don't
gallery.
think they have a whole lot.
They have things that say like, oh, this blocks more if you play a shadow or
block more, or it's like free to cast against if it's targeting a shadow card. So there are things that care about specifically when light and shadow go up against each other, not just in terms of the mechanic, but also just in terms of what is printed on the card. When it says light or soul, shadow, banish zone, they are specifically fighting against each other.
Because it's the War of the Monarch.
It's the War of the Monarch. This really differs from other talent and class designs. We don't really see that type of direct hate be printed ever, especially to this large degree that we see.
Yeah, because in Arya, all the three elements are kind of living together in harmony. And in Volcor, it's everyone's draconic. So they definitely hate each other, but they're all the same talent.
Yeah, they don't quite have that dichotomous element, that like set against each other.
Not
quite
in
as
flavor
much.
and not mechanically either.
One thing I kind of did want to mention earlier is that the new Prism actually has a super bad matchup into the new Shadow Runeblade Vincent. Because with Vincent, if you play a non-attack action, you can guarantee the next arcane damage, which can pop the angels. So that Ward 4 just becomes Ward 1.
Yeah.
No, not even that. If they have multiple angels, they'll all pop.
Really?
Yeah, because each one of them tries to prevent the damage, and none of them can.
Yeah, so it's a horrible matchup for the new Prism specifically. And I think that that's really indicative of kind of what's happening in War of the Monarch. The general conversation that I've seen is the first set was the status quo. Light is on top, Shadow's kind of this underdog sort of rebellion kind of force as they're fighting against each other. The second movie, bad guys start winning. That's like a very interesting thing that they're kind of doing a little bit of storytelling with. I don't know how intentional it was, but I think it's cool.
Yeah, I think it is intentional. Like the way that the light cards that target shadow cards specifically, they don't seem as powerful as the shadow cards that target light heroes specifically. For instance, being able to cast a underrate card for free if it targets a shadow card or prevent more damage from a shadow card. Whereas the cards that Levy has gotten with the ones that have like guaranteed go again, guaranteed buff, or guaranteed hit from soul, all of these seem like way more powerful than the first iteration of Monarch.
Yeah.
And like you said previously with Vincent, being able to just auto kill all of the angels seems, I don't know, that seems like very canonically motivated.
Yeah.
And just, as a way of hedging against Prism being on the top of the meta again.
Mm-hmm. In the Oldhim episode, I complained about how storytelling in Fab isn't really up to snuff.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how intentional this is and how much they push it in both lore and cards moving forward, then I'm going to say this is a definite win on the storytelling aspect of Flesh and Blood.
I almost feel the opposite, actually, because this is our second set that solely focuses on the Demonastery and the Church of Solana, Church of Sol. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't really know anything that's going on. And I've been like looking at the cards all the time, like, is the Demonastery winning? What is the battle? Where is it taking place? Like, who's actually fighting? What does Bolton do? Is he a general? Is he just like a knight? There's a throne at all and prisms on it?
Yeah, they can still do more. This is better. I'm going to celebrate the small wins. Because it's got to be the positive reinforcement. If you give them positive reinforcement,
true.
They'll keep doing it. This is very good, LSS. Good job. Go do more.
I like the idea. Yeah.
I also think that this dichotomous design, I kind of want to open it up for conversation here of, do we like it? Do we like it when two classes or two talents are specifically set against each other, have mechanics set to fight each other, and like nothing else? Do we think that's good?
I do not. And this is kind of a complex problem because Levia having game into specifically light, I can't really ask for a whole lot against other heroes, specifically because Brute itself is supposed to not have any on hits. The identity of the class itself is RNG, rolling for action points, randomly discarding, having high rate attacks, but no on hits. That's like the main thing. So if I have game specifically into other heroes with these other benefits, it's like having these wildly satted attacks and random chance to get more than one action point, then I think that's a problem game design wise. And also, if I really like the flavor of a hero and I only get to experience that flavor against one other hero and that hero isn't in the meta at all, then that's what feels bad too, because then I have these extra effects that should have just applied to the field and not so much just this one matchup that I'll have in like limited, for instance.
I think the dichotomous design that you're talking about, I actually kind of like it in limited, at least in that context. Yes. To have a limited environment where the cards that you're drafting are specifically to bolster your hero while you are directly coming up against these other heroes in the draft, I think that can be a really interesting design choice. I'm drafting Chain. Do I take Spew Shadow because I just want to be able to play cards out of my banish because I don't have very many Blood Debt cards? Do I play Spew Shadow because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of Prisms and Boltons around in the draft, especially if I'm taking the Chain cards? Do I pass on Spew Shadow because I don't think that the upside is worth it given what I'm trying to do in my deck? Do I pass because I don't expect to see a lot of light heroes to go up against, right? I think it gives the player more agency in the draft, something extra to think about when they're putting their deck together. It's also a reminder in this draft, like, hey, you are fighting people. Have a plan for your opponents.
Yeah. The sideboard tech as it was, or the like, oh, this card is more powerful because I have it in this specific matchup. I think the strong theming of this sort of dichotomous design is incredibly good. I think it felt great to play in these Monarch drafts. I would also say, Joel, not quite to counter, but to show the other side of the coin on your point. Let's say Prism is really strong in the meta.
Sure.
Now, I'm playing Levia, and Levia has a really good card into Prism. Levia is a little bit better in the meta.
For sure.
Because Prism is good in the meta. So I think it's great as this like anti-meta sniping tech that can allow people with worse heroes to have better matchups into what's really strong right now.
Yeah, I think sideboard cards that are siloed to specific heroes can be really cool. Like, you can always print them at generic, but to have one hero allow them to have a good matchup against another specific hero, I think that just kind of makes things a little spicier. I don't know if that's like what I want to see everyone based on. I don't want to see it all the time even, but it can be really cool when one hero is given one tool against another couple heroes.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Like, you can't have like a silver bullet for every deck, but I do see the value of like, oh, if there's a prism, cool. Now I can play Vincent or Levia because I have these insane cards that really play into my game plan, but really flourish against her. So maybe I have a way to take this like historically D tier hero and like win an event or place really high because I'm expecting this certain hero to be at the top.
And that can always be reversed, right? Let's say that the Vincent ends up becoming this incredible meta dominant hero. And the strategy is to like keep multiple Rune Gate cards in your banish zone until you can release 3 of them in one turn with this incredible pop off. But now all of a sudden these light cards, these generic light cards that turn cards in banish upside down are very powerful because they take away that ability. So I think it's interesting. I think it is cool. Maybe not good, maybe not strong, but I think like you got to have some of that in the card game. And you got to at least push for it, let it have its place. It can feel bad, but I think you got to be willing to keep giving it a shot. And I think this is really the set where we're going to see whether it sinks or floats.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm okay with letting it kind of just sit in the flavor town until it becomes, meta relevant. I do like draft a little bit more because I never drafted Monarch until now, and I never felt in other drafts that there was a way to interact with your other, drafters in a significant way other than just, beating them. But having this flavor of like, okay, oh, sweet, I'm playing against Prism. These Spew Shadows are going to give me extra value because I already wanted them because I've like don't have many Blood Deck cards, but now they just have this extra 2 power.
But I think the Dichotomous design, while it's very cool and interesting, there was one major place where I think LSS did not do a great job. So I'm calling this asymmetrical execution, insymmetrical design. When you have dichotomous game design, I think it also needs to be symmetrical. I think it needs to be fairly equal. And so far what we've been talking about is an equality, right?
Right.
There is an equality in the light cards hating on shadow cards and shadow cards hating on light.
Like they are equal?
They are equal. Up until we hit specializations. The specializations for light heroes help the light heroes do their game plan better. And the specializations for shadow heroes don't. And that is a major problem. That the specialization card, the card that's supposed to make me feel like, oh, this is Levia incarnate, this is Vincent incarnate, isn't. That is bad design. I think the idea was for the specialization to give a powerful effect that then has a little extra on top.
Right.
And so the idea is like, okay, well, for the Shadow Heroes, you get to summon this 6/6 demon. 6/6 demon ally is really strong. Not everybody runs 6 powered attacks, which means they may need to put 2 cards towards killing it. That's very good. It doesn't have Phantasm, so it doesn't pop, unlike many other allies. Right? They have to specifically put an attack towards it to destroy it.
Right.
But that's all it is. It is a 6/6 demon that you can attack with for free, which means you need to give another card go again to even attack with it. Is that Screaming Shadow? Is this helping me do more with my banish zone? Is this helping me play more cards in my turn? No. It is very cool because of the 6/6/6 synergy. That is very Shadow, very demonic, very Satanist, very cool. Love it. But I just don't really feel Shadow in the card, in the design of the card. I will say that there is one exception. There is a Prism specialization that is a Herald that has, I believe, Dominate. It's Herald of Judgment. If it hits, you get to put it into your soul like every other Herald, but then the defending hero can't play cards from their banish zone. So it's a normal Herald with this cool extra effect if you're playing against a shadow hero, but also maybe it has a little bit of extra synergy. There are multiple heroes who try to play things from banish zone. But with the shadow heroes, we don't really see that. Chain actually did have a specialization that was very good. It's not symmetrical. Both of Bolton's specializations don't have that issue. They help Bolton do Bolton's game plan better. And we just don't really get that for the shadow specializations. I really wanted to see them fix that in Dusk to Dawn, and they didn't. Maybe they did a little bit with Levia, with the demi-hero card, but I was underwhelmed with them trying to remedy that specific issue.
It's almost like they don't consider it an issue, you know? Like they're okay with the shadow specs having just this really cool ally that also happens to have an anti-light effect, because that is kind of what they're about. Maybe they're just trying to sell the story there. Like that's what it means to be Vincent right now.
I will say, like, Levias is probably the most relevant of the allies because you have 6 cards in Blood Debt. You probably need to keep turning it off. So being able to banish a shadow card from your hand, theoretically to 6, so you can still keep fueling your game plan, you're left wanting more. It doesn't have Go Again either, unless... is Ursa the one that gets Go Again if you attack
Ursa gets Go Again if you attack a light hero.
Right, so we have to roll a second action point or play something prior to get the benefit of Blasphemous.
Usually ending the chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, feels great swinging for 6 for free, but I have to do so much as Levia, including not die every turn. So it's kind of a lot to ask of the Levia player to also.
And it is powerful. You talk to any Levia player, anyone who plays Blood Debt Levia semi-competitively, and they will say, no, playing Doomsday is great. Blasphemous is a great card for the game, but it just doesn't feel that way. I pull a Doomsday, I don't feel excited. In fact, it's almost straight up unplayable in Limited, which sucks. You want the cards to be playable in Limited. You want it to be a nice, powerful card that you feel good for opening, that makes you want to draft that hero. That's what it should be, at least. That's how I see specializations.
You guys ready to move on to our Arsenal zone?
You know I am.
So this is the part of the show where we shout out different cards that we've been thinking about, that cards that have been on our mind, cards that we like, cards that we love to hate. So the card that I'm shouting out today is one of my favorites. It's one of my go-tos whenever I see spoilers and I think, man, this existing card would pair so well with this new spoiler. And it's Ravenous Rabble. Ravenous Rabble is this nice common that just slots into decks really nicely because it's a free go again attack that could maybe swing for 4 if you're lucky enough to reveal a red card on top. Because this card has a relatively unique effect of looking at the top card of your deck. What's the pitch value? Is it a red? Sweet, you get to swing for 4. Is it a blue? Sorry, you're swinging for 2, bucko. And there's a lot of different synergies that could exist there. If you happen to reveal a Gorgonian Tome off the top, ooh, baby, you get to swing for 5 because it has 0 pitch value. That means you get -0. And they just spoiled a common in the new set that has a 0 pitch value.
Wait, what? Which one?
Yeah.
It's called Dimensional Vortex.
Oh, yeah.
It's a majestic, but you can play 3 of it where it's not legendary. You can have 3 of this card in your deck. That makes it so much easier for you to hit a 0 off the top with Ravenous Rabble.
And so easy for you to end up with a card with no attack value, no block value, and no pitch value in your hand. But 0 for 5 and go again?
Stonks.
That's actually pretty sweet. I like that.
Also, shout out to Bracers of Belief, the arms equipment that basically does the exact same thing. So if you want to build that red line / 0 pitch line deck, Ravenous Rabble is there, just waiting for its time to shine. Also, shout out to Azuri, who can flash it in for a 5 go again, which is honestly pretty good. I'd pay 2 for an attack that costs 5 with go again, right? It's called Zealous Belting. People do it all the time. Azuri can send in Ravenous Rabble, have a 5 go again, and then just keep going on with her turn.
I'm so glad I let you cook. That was pretty cool.
Yo, that's so cracked and plays into one of my... Oh my god, that plays into another idea I've been playing around with so hard.
People run Ravenous Rabble in Azuri lists, but I haven't seen them actually flash it in. I think they just play it as a 0 for 4, which is like a lot of value, you know? I also really like it in Briar because I can play a Channel Mat Heroic and then give all my Ravenous Rabbles +3, and suddenly I don't care what I flip over the top. So Ravenous Rabble... Thank you for enabling some of my weird brews. I would like to sign a copy of Red Ravenous Rabble for each of you. I've got 2 copies right here, Outsider 213. Just let me on the sleeve. Sign it right here.
A scribble.
One for you and one for you.
Thank you, Fuzzy.
I'm going to put this in a Zuri brew. I'm working on.
Oh, yeah. You could totally play that one, too. A lot of the cards I give you guys are, like, not playable in like, any context. This one's good. This one is meta-defining.
Yeah, I like this one better than, what was it, Blue Come to Fight?
No, Blue Come to Fight's cracked, bro.
Yeah, I don't know.
Blue Block 3? Are you kidding?
People play Blue Come to Fight in some Briar builds because with the Vitamin of Earth, it blocks for 4. It's a blue block 4, you know?
That's pretty good, not gonna lie. I do prefer Ravenous Rabble, so thank you, Fuzzy. My card is completely different from this card. It was spoiled in, gosh, what was it? I think Dynasty? Yeah. It's Spirit of Irina, Bolton's late wife, RIP.
Wow.
It's a 0-cost aura where if you charge it, it goes to the arena or the battlefield or whatever. And I really like this card in particular because, I mean, I talked about it briefly in the podcast, but being able to charge like auras from your hand and go straight to the battlefield that normally don't have go again, I feel like that's a great way to get closer to making Bolton good. You know what I mean? Because getting courage tokens, the quicker tokens are nice. If there's another aura that like says every time you banish a card from soul, you buff your next attack or give yourself a life gain or something like that. All of those are really interesting design spaces, and seeing this card in a sea of cards that I didn't care about during spoiler season, I was just like going nuts in the Discord chat when I first saw it. So anyways, that's my shout out for today. Oh, and it also lets you play Illumina Ascension at instant speed and gives you go again. That's the reason why I like this card. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, playing this
net an action point and also play one of your most powerful cards in the deck for freezies.
pretty
auto
nice.
include.
Yep.
Auto include.
And the way that it combos with like Via the Vanguard, because typically you can't play them together because you close the chain and Via the Vanguard cares about the chain being open. So you play Via the Vanguard, charge, buff your entire board by 1, and then play Lumina on top of it, getting action point onto Via the Vanguard, and then your rating swings for 5.
Wow.
Twice.
Yeah.
5 twice.
5 twice. Meanwhile, 5 does like 30 damage in a turn, but we don't talk about that. Anyways, shout out to Spirit of Arena.
For my shout out, I want to get philosophical.
Oh, man.
Lord.
I want to really ponder the truths of the universe, really dig deep into what does it mean to be a bloodthirsty monster that wants to decimate your enemies. What is the worst weapon you can carry into a medieval battle? An axe. Axes are stupid, axes are bad, but the coolest characters use axes. The coolest, baddest motherfuckers use axes. But I've been brewing. I've been on a brewing spree since dusk till dawn, and that just means looking at a lot of card lists. And I'll see things like Felling Swing and Spill Blood and Cleave and go, who is this for? Nobody yet. But that's the thing. You got to get these cards now, everybody. Get them now. Get them now while they're cheap, while they're bad, while they're not good for anyone, and then put them in a deck and take them to Blitz and lose with them. Because you want to be the guy with an axe deck first. You want to be first to the table.
I'm sorry, Clark. Just so we're clear, what is your card shout out?
My card shout out is the idea of axes. It is the concept.
That's a theoretical.
I told you I was getting philosophical with it,
Got
Fuzzy.
it.
I made it clear from the get-go. It is axes. Axes,
think-
axes, axes.
This is why I failed philosophy class.
I'm here for the ride. Keep going.
I think this is also why I failed philosophy class.
Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Executive producer, Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. Sound mixing, Christopher Moore. And last but not least, you. Thank you for listening. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me podcast. Stay tuned for some outtakes.
Prism definitely Gaslight Gatekeeps Girl Boss. 100%. Gimli uses an axe.
That's true. Gimli's a real one.
I don't have any other